This episode of Author Stories is brought to you by Athon Books. Check out the very best in science fiction and fantasy at athonbooks.com.
You're listening to the Author Stories podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Tammy Euliano on the show with me today. She has an amazing new book. It's called Fatal Intent, and if you love thrillers the way I do, this is a must-have. What an amazing debut novel this is. Welcome to the show, Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. Tammy, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, actually, it's kind of funny. Just a couple weeks ago, my parents emptied out their attic and gave me a box of my, childhood, whatever they'd kept. And in it was a couple of stories written on that old paper that had the wide lines with the dotted line in the middle. And I had written a couple of different stories about ladybugs and cows, and they were actually pretty awful, but adorable for a little 5-year-old. And so I guess that was my first inkling. But of course, I didn't actually write much at that time other than what I had to for school. But I was a voracious reader. I then didn't really start writing until probably high school. I started having more interest in the idea of actually writing a book, although I didn't get very far in anything until much later.
You were a voracious reader. What sorts of stories really captured your imagination?
I read every biography we had in our library, and they weren't David McCullough kind of biographies. They were more geared toward children, but I really loved things about American history, Revolutionary War, that sort of stuff. And then, of course, Nancy Drew fascinated me with her ability to find all the clues and solve all the mysteries. But really anything. I was very much a tomboy, so certainly nothing romantic, but lots of histories and sports.
So your introduction to Nancy Drew, what was it about mysteries and those sorts of stories that really captured your imagination?
I really loved how capable she was, how observant she was. I would challenge myself to be observant like her and realized I absolutely was not. But just the idea that she could pick out a few what seemed like minor details and put them all together and come up with the whodunit was very interesting to me.
I love that. Tammy, you are a physician now, and I would love to hear the story of how that came to be. As a kid who loves stories and a very bookish kid, what led you to the medical field?
It was a circuitous route, shall we say. I think I was the only one in my medical school who hadn't wanted to be a doctor since they were a toddler. I actually wanted to do something dramatic like cure cancer or Alzheimer's or something huge with my life, and got some advice that the best thing to do would be to go to medical school and then become a researcher, which is, for anyone who's interested in that path, that is not the best way to do it. And so I did well in college and got into an MD PhD program, and pretty quickly realized that research wasn't as glorified as I had found it to be in my imagination. It was a lot of drudgery and washing beakers and observing rats. And I pretty quickly realized that was not what I wanted to do. So I dropped out of the PhD part, and then I said, oh my gosh, now I'm in huge debt to the medical school and I guess I'm going to be a doctor. So it was a little bit of a weird route. And actually, I tried to drop out of medical school on 2 different occasions and was very fortunate to have some mentors who stepped in and convinced me that there was a way to do it that would pique my interest. So anesthesiology actually fits so well with the pick up on the clues and figure out what the problem is and solve it all in the same sitting, as opposed to see somebody in clinic and send them home and hope you got the right diagnosis and wait a month and see if you got it right. And so I started working on a simulator. It's a full-scale human patient simulator that was being invented at my institution at University of Florida. And so that gave me the chance to do a little engineering and problem solving, and that kept me in school. And now I'm an anesthesiologist who's going back to my roots and starting to write again.
I love that. You went to the University of Florida. Are you from Florida?
I was raised from the age of 3 in Central Florida.
Gotcha. I'm fascinated by the idea of place and where we're from, how that seeps into the types of stories that we tell, or kind of how where we come from comes out in the art that we create. Do you feel a connection with Florida or Central Florida specifically in the types of stories that you tell?
Absolutely. North Central Florida in particular. But I actually have to be careful because there's only one really major medical center in North Central Florida, and I name streets and I have locales that are very clearly Gainesville, but the hospital is absolutely not the University of Florida. It actually becomes a little bit of a challenge, but in my short fiction as well, everything ends up being something related to this region, and the Florida Gators were huge fans, so that tends to spring in someplace, and the lake that we spend a lot of time on. So yes, absolutely, and that determines what the weather is going to be like for my characters and the scenery. So you're right. I hadn't really thought about it, but where you grow up and where you consider home definitely invades unexpected areas of your writing.
Tammy, as an anesthesiologist and all of the different work that you do, I would imagine has given you the opportunity to do lots of writing, but not necessarily creative writing. What was it that brought you back around to your love of fiction and wanting to create fiction?
Well, during medical school and residency, there was certainly no time to read fiction. And then I started having children, and that took all my time. And then I became very involved in medical student education. And I went to the former chairman of our department, who was a mentor of mine, and said, there's really not a good textbook that I can direct our medical students to. And he said, well, let's write one then. And so he and I spent a couple of years writing an introductory, a very not highbrow sort of introductory textbook. It's got some humor in it. It's got lots of little, stupid facts that aren't important but are interesting. And as we finished that book, we so enjoyed writing together that he suggested that we write a fiction book together, which took me by surprise, but we started working on it. And then he fell ill, but and I have not yet gone back to that book, but I got the bug from there, and I really haven't stopped since then. And that's been, 7 or 8 years now. It just really absorbed under my skin to where I couldn't think of other things. I desperately needed to see what my characters were going to do next. And it really is almost an addiction, I think.
Fatal Intent is your first novel that you published. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
But you have published quite a bit of short fiction as well. What was it that got you started writing short fiction? And another question to kind of tag onto that is, do you consider those two as different art forms, writing short fiction versus long fiction, and do you approach them differently?
That's an interesting question. So I started writing short fiction mostly because I couldn't get an agent and I couldn't get my book published, and I needed a break to do something else while I had sent it out to another round of beta readers. And somebody suggested, and I wish I could remember who, that you can start getting some writing credits by writing some short stuff. And I started, and it was very fun. It's so nice to have such a small cast of characters and a narrow goal for it. Description is not something I enjoy very much, and in short fiction you are allowed to leave most of that out. And so I finally got one published in an online journal that would pretty much publish anything that got sent to them. And that was really fun. And so I started looking for more opportunities to write. And it's actually very different, but also the same. You still need an arc, you still need a plot, and you need compelling characters who have a reason to be involved in the plot. But it's bite-sized. You can write it in a day and then edit it, in my case, for a month. And it's not so daunting to send that to a friend and say, would you mind reading through this for me, and giving me some thoughts. So it's actually very fun. I use it as a break when I'm bogged down in my novel, or when the novel is at the reviewers and I need to do something else. Jenny Milchman once told me, she's an author, she said, you should always be having the creative brain working too. So even when you're in the editing phase, you should take breaks to do something else, whether that's start another novel or write short fiction. And I think that really helps me. I think it's a very different piece of brain that is creating versus editing what's already on the page.
Absolutely. Ray Bradbury kind of famously encouraged new writers to write a new short story every week for a year. And he would jokingly say, because you can't write 52 bad stories in a row, eventually something good is going to come out of that. And
I love that.
That's kind of tongue in cheek, but there really is something to be said for working on your craft and honing it and doing something, over and over enough. But were there, and I know you said that you started writing short fiction while you're trying to get your novel published and things like that. But did writing short fiction teach you anything that you then, were able to say, oh, okay, now I kind of understand this concept, whatever it might be. And do you feel like that practice made you a better writer?
Definitely. First of all, just creating a complete story arc, because a short story has to go from beginning to end. And in a novel, you could work on the middle forever and never get to the end, as some of my friends have done. So yes, it taught me, I think, a lot about that. Also about getting to the point quicker, which in a novel isn't as essential, but realizing where you can expound without ruining your pace. I think I learned a lot about pace from writing short fiction. And I also took a couple classes and got some feedback, and how to create a setting in just a few words was, I think, useful to me. So yes, I recommend it to anyone. And in fact, I frequently recommend it to my friends that, even if you're thinking about a novel, write a piece of it as a short story first and see how you get to know your characters and what you think they're going to do from there.
Are you looking for software that helps you bring your novel to life? Novelize is a web-based writing app which allows you to access your work on any device with a browser and an internet connection, right from your desktop, laptop, tablet, or smartphone. Just get the novel written. Say goodbye to sticky notes. With our notebook on the side, you can keep track of all the important information you need to write your novel. We keep distractions to a minimum, help you track your progress, and encourage you to write more novels. You can even use the same notebook for your novels in a series. Outline, write, or organize your novel by switching between modes. You can write your outline notes while you're writing, and you can move scenes and chapters around anytime in the organize mode. Choose between the dark and light theme to help prevent eye strain so that you can stay immersed in your book. Novelize, the app for writers by writers. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website. Developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates, PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.
I love to talk, Tammy, about the beginnings of projects, because it's really this magical thing that one moment there is no story, these characters don't exist, the story doesn't exist, and then in the writer's mind, maybe a character walks on the stage of your mind, and you ask who is this and what is she doing, and and then the story starts unfolding. Or maybe you read a newspaper or a magazine article, or see something on the news, and then the what if game starts playing in your mind. How do stories usually begin for you? What is that first kernel of an idea that blossoms into a story?
So far, mine have all started with an issue, like how should people die was something that was left over from elementary school when I was on a debate about the fate of Karen Ann Quinlan. If you remember that, I was maybe 10 years old at the time. Yeah. Have no idea what side I happened to be on in the debate, but it was elementary school, and it was it made an impression on me that people were making a decision for someone who couldn't make that decision for themselves, and that not even her family was necessarily able to make that decision without input from others. And then that persisted through medical school and residency. And so that's where I started with Fatal Intent. The other book I've written that I'm hoping to get published soon is also based on it was a short story course that I was taking, and it was a flash fiction course, actually. And the idea was, what if something happened and no one could get pregnant, and then someone figured out how to make it possible to have fertility, but it was an expensive treatment? Who decides? Who decides who gets to have a baby? And are there any, do you do a wallet biopsy and see if they can afford it? Do you do genetic testing to make sure that they're not going to perpetuate some dread disease? And it just really fascinated me. So I've written a novel sort of based on that. The sequel to Fatal Intent also started with an interesting problem, and then obviously I already had the characters for that one. But so I guess I come up with first the question, and I want my writing to be, and this sounds pretentious, but I want it to be something that people think about, not just in respect to the story itself, not just, gee, this guy went from point A to point B and a couple people died, but what would I do in that situation, and what would the world be like if this were true? And so that's kind of where I start.
And that's the great thing about fiction, isn't it? Is that it can be almost like a life simulator. You talked about the simulator that you had worked on, but fiction is sort of that way. We get to explore things that maybe we don't believe, but we get to play that what if game. Well, what happens if this, if a character does this, or if a person is faced with this circumstance, what is their reaction, and then what should our reaction be to their reaction, and you get to play out scenarios without having. It's kind of the best kind of life simulator if you look at it that way.
Right.
Yeah. With Fatal Intent, one thing that I love about this book is you have such a robust cast of characters, and it's not just one character's experience. But Kate kind of is the main protagonist, but she's surrounded by an interesting cast of folks. How did you put together the well, first off, where did Kate come from, and then how did the people around her come to be?
Well, Kate started out as me 20 to 30 years ago, which I think a lot of authors do when they begin, at least her professional life, teaching and being an obstetric anesthesiologist. Of course, gratefully not her personal life with all the horrors that have happened to her. And so I started with her. And then the other characters just sort of, I always like books that have a little bit of comic relief in them. And so I needed a couple characters that could rightly do that without it being, I don't know, sometimes in a tense scene, it doesn't seem right for your main character to all of a sudden tell a joke. So I needed somebody who was a little bit off kilter like that. And Aunt Irm, actually, that original mentor that I mentioned that got me started doing this, when we started our book, that character was in there. It was his Aunt Irm who had participated in raising him when he was orphaned in Germany during World War II. And it was a favorite aunt, and he described her. I wish I'd had more time with him to get more description, but he talked about her reading her krimis, which I mentioned, the basically short mysteries written in German. And so she just sort of went from there. I'm sure she's an amalgam of other people I've known or characters I've seen on TV, but the things she says and the misperceptions she has are they just sort of pop in my mind, and I find them funny. And apparently many people have said she's their favorite character, which is good and bad, I guess. And then Christian, was just the character that I needed for that role. And of course, he's modeled after some people that I know, again, a compilation of multiple people. My husband actually has never read the book, but he says that I kill him off and so that I can date someone else. And I say, why can't you be the guy I'm dating instead? Which I'm not actually dating, but it's funny to hear him be critical of a book he hasn't read yet.
That's so funny. Talking about Great Aunt Irm and that needed comic relief, with a book and a story like this where tensions can really be high, it's almost necessary to give the reader a break every now and then to let their emotions come down, because if you just have a reader's adrenaline pegged, the whole time, it's hard to really deliver emotion when emotion's just pegged out all the time. Was that something that you recognized early on in the story, that you needed a character like that, or what was the process like to realize that she was needed in the story?
She actually appeared at the very beginning, and I don't know whether it was because I had been working with Dr. Gravenstein and he brought her into my mind, or what. The idea of pacing and accelerating pacing and having periods of decreased adrenaline definitely came through in the courses that I took and reading books on craft that I learned about that. I don't know if I would have organically done that correctly. And of course, I don't know that I did it correctly, but I think it was definitely something I considered. But Aunt Irm was already there, and so using her for part of that, and also Nathan, the simulator engineer, who's kind of a goofball, those just sort of fit in and were purposeful in retrospect.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about these kind of big ideas that we get to explore in fiction. What is the big idea in Intent?
The big idea I hope people take away is that the way we die, if not a rapid thing from an accident or whatever, in the U.S. is something we need to talk about. There is not a way to control your own death in a way that we do for our pets. You would never think to watch a pet starve to death when he could no longer fend for himself. And yet we do that with our loved ones, which as a physician, that's something that you just can't go there. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be a discussion about how this should happen. And in my profession, I'm a little bit removed from most of those decisions, except when I did critical care. But I hear about it, about the struggles of a family trying to decide what to do. And I've had this discussion with my own husband. What do you want, honey, if you can't make a decision for yourself? I don't care. I'll be dead. You decide. And I try to impress upon people that that's not fair, because if I make one decision and my kids want a different decision, legally it's my choice, but that creates some potential conflict that didn't have to be there if he would have just written a document that said, I want this, this, and this, and not that. And we see lots of patients who have not made those decisions clear. And like I said, having it in writing just takes a burden off of the people that you love.
Right. Tammy, I don't know if you've noticed, but as someone who works in the medical community, I'm sure that you've had an interesting year this past year, and now publishing a new book, kind of in the middle of a global pandemic, has to be an interesting time. What has 2020 and all that it has brought? What has that meant for your publishing journey?
The big things are, the lack of book launches and not being able to go to the meetings, the writing meetings that I have enjoyed in the past. I still was able to meet with some writer friends, but smaller groups. And so it's made it more isolating, of course. Work has actually at the hospital has not changed much for me, because I do obstetric anesthesia and babies couldn't care less whether there's a pandemic. So
Right.
many of my colleagues were working less when we had all the ORs closed for not doing elective cases, but my job didn't really change. I only work 3 days a week, and so I continued to work those 3 days. So in that respect, not much. The way I teach changed quite a bit, and so I've been doing a lot more teaching on Zoom and stuff. But for the launch, I think definitely the no book tours and things like that. I don't know if I would have enjoyed that or not, but I won't have that experience, at least not this time. What's really funny is I had started a book long before COVID about a pandemic that was actually a bioengineered virus that did all these awful things, and now I wonder if I will ever get that published, because it's a little too close to home at this point.
Yeah, I'm wondering over the next 2 years if we're going to have a glut of pandemic novels and thrillers, or if people are just going to run the other direction. I personally, I'm probably not going to pick up a pandemic book for a while. But I am interested to see kind of what readers will, if they're looking to, for some solace in that, or and to sort of live through that again to get some resolution, or if we just don't want to talk about it. I don't know yet where we are.
Right. Well, the book is not as much about life during a pandemic as it is about the scientists trying to find a solution. So it's a lot more in the lab, and it's sort of Dan Brownish with mysteries to solve. But yeah, I have a feeling agents will not be very interested in it for quite some time.
Well, That will be interesting to see for sure. Tammy, a lot of new writers feel like they don't have the time, with busy lives to carve out time for themselves and for their writing. As someone who's a physician and a teacher and a writer, how do you find the time to work on your craft?
It can be challenging. So on my days at work, there's no way, it's very, very busy. So that takes me from 7 to 6 or so. I usually try to get in an hour or two at night, depending on what my husband's doing, if he's busy with something else. And then Fridays are my main writing day. I take every Friday off, and usually I go out. We have a lake house that's just out in the middle of the boondocks, so it's a great place to not be distracted by anything other than my dogs, who want the ball to be thrown at least every 12 seconds. And then on weekends, it's picking time. If my husband goes to the golf course, then I get to write for a few hours. But it's definitely stealing time away from some other things. But my kids are gone; they're all living their lives, so I'm not taking time away from them, and I just find time. If I were to try to do this when I was 30, I don't think it would have been possible. So I've been very blessed that financially I can afford to work only 3 days a week and spend a lot of the other time either doing stuff with friends and family or writing.
Gotcha. You mentioned earlier that there was a follow-up to Fatal Intent. I was wondering if this story would continue, or if these characters would have more life after this book. What can you tell us anything about what you're following this up with?
So when I wrote Fatal Intent, I didn't plan on it being a series, although I loved Kate and I would have loved to make a series. I thought, gosh, what anesthesiologist at a small town academic medical center is going to run into multiple mysteries? And then people pointed out, Murder, She Wrote and all the cozy sort of things where bad things happen all the time. And when I got the publishing contract, they said, this is for 2 books. And I said, oh, there is no second book. And they said, there will be. And so I started thinking about it. So in this one, it's the same cast of characters with a new mystery, more into the medical technology, device issues. And it's coming together. I thought I was done with it, and then I met with my critique group, and they pointed out some pretty big holes. So now I'm rewriting the second half of it, and it was due in January. So that's kind of gone, but hopefully in the next month or so, and then it'll probably take a year to get it out. But yeah, Kate and Christian and Aunt Irm move on for the next event.
Love it. Well, the new book is called Fatal Intent, and when you're hearing this, it's been out for a couple of days, and you can grab it on Amazon or at your local bookstore, in Kindle edition or actual paper, if that's how you prefer to read. And we're going to put links to those in the show notes of this episode to make it easy for folks to find the book. Tammy, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
My website is www.tyuliano.com, and it's got most of my short fiction. There's links to those there, and a little bit more about me and my life.
Great. We'll put a link there as well. Tammy, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started. Dream Author by Sophie Hannah is an immersive 14-month coaching program for writers at any and every level of experience, and also for those of you who want to write and are just waiting for the right encouragement and guidance to get you started. Your writing dreams should make you happy. For so many of us, our dreams are not a source of happiness. Instead, they cause us stress, guilt, frustration, and even shame. Here's the great news. All of these feelings are natural and all writers experience them. The problem, though, is that when your writing dreams bring you more anxiety than joy, it affects your resolve and your productivity, and you end up not taking the action you need to take in order to propel your dreams in the right direction so that they can stand a strong chance of coming true. That's why Sophie created the Dream Author Coaching Program, to teach anyone who is passionate about writing how to change the way they build, think about, and pursue their writing dreams in order to become their own most powerful ally and advocate for the rest of their writing life. And more great news, once you've learned that skill, it lasts forever. Visit dreamauthorcoaching.com to get started today. The Bad Company Complete Series Omnibus, Books 1 through 7. Humanity's Greatest Export, Justice. Space is a dangerous place, even for the wary, especially for the unprepared. The aliens have no idea. Here comes the Bad Company. The Bad Company Book 1, Colonel Terry Henry Walton takes his warriors into battle for a price in this first installment of the Bad Company. He believes in the moral high ground and is happy to get paid for his role in securing it. Set in the Cutherian Gambit universe, Terry, Char, and their people humans, werewolves, were-tigers, and vampires form the core of the Bad Company's direct action branch, a private conflict solution enterprise. Join them as they fight their way across Tissakinnon 4, where none of the warring parties were what they expected. The 7-book series omnibus includes The Bad Company, Blockade, Price of Freedom, Liberation, Destroyer, Discovery, Overwhelming Force. Grab the complete Bad Company series by Craig Martell now. How to Be a Badass Witch by Michael Anderle. Virtutus Gloria Mercies. Translation: Glory is the reward of valor. Fed up with playing the normal game, recent university graduate, ex-cum laude, ex-soccer star, ex-popular, and mostly broke Cara Madano changes her life when she decides to research how to be a witch and believes it. Cara didn't want to go back east and deal with her overbearing mom, so when university was done, she stayed behind in Los Angeles. Little did she realize how controlling moms can be from the other side of the country. Feeling a little desperate to make her own way, she buys a few books on business and one on a lark, How to Be a Badass Witch. That's when the trouble started. Find out just what trouble a young woman can get into when the magic just might be real. How to Be a Badass Witch by Michael Anderle.